Welcome to this special episode of That Time I Got Reincarnated in the Same World as an Anime Podcaster. I'm your host, Isekai Sensei Sama, aka Brad, and as always, I'm joined by Bento Baggins, aka Ben.
Hello.
And Kermit D. Grog.
Ahoy hoy.
And being a special episode, joining us today is the creator and host of the wonderful gaming nostalgia podcast, Deleted Saves, Phil.
Hello. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Welcome to Deleted Save, Sama.
Well, to kick us off today, why don't you tell us a little bit about your podcast and how you got started?
Okay. Deleted Saves is a short-form podcast, usually between about 5 and 20 minutes, where I talk about certain video games that have stuck with me long after I stopped playing them, and possibly even deleted the save files, because I have an old habit of doing that to save space on my hard drives. And I just sort of give my opinion on them. It's my thoughts, not really following a lot of the probably gaming zeitgeist. So there have been episodes where I have gone against what a lot of people thought was a popular opinion on game. Others, I've talked about games that I think most people probably haven't really heard of. I know we all like to have that special game out there that, nobody heard about this and nobody played, so I get to talk about it. But a few of them, I'm like, no, that's very likely people did not do that. I'm very bingeable. I've had many people tell me it's a great thing to listen to while they're on lunch break at work and just get caught up. Where did I get started? Well, I got started I was in May of 2021, so I've been doing this for 2 years now. Initially, I wanted to start out as a Twitch streamer. So I actually wanted to start streaming Skyrim. So I loaded up everything on my PC, mods of the whole deal, got OBS working, and I'd made my debut on Twitch. And about maybe a minute or so in, part of my brain said, hold off and check your sound. So I checked back the minute I had been, like the couple minutes I'd been streaming, and I could hear the game audio very well, but no other audio. So as it turns out, my PC port, the mic thing on the $2,000 PC I had, doesn't work. So I'd been talking to my wall. And
like
the only one who heard, the only one who heard me was my cat, and who was sitting there just looking at me funny, like I'd been talking to no one. So that was the end of my Twitch career. But I decided I still wanted to talk about games, and I had done a little bit of podcasting with friends of mine. We'd been talking like, D&D, tabletop sort of stuff. And I figured, well, I have the setup, so why don't I just talk about games anyway? So I went through a chronological list of all the different game systems I played, the games that really stood out to me. Some I had to actually jog my memory, because it's like, oh, God, I remember this. And like, okay, yeah, I still remember this. Let's have something to talk about. And I started recording my earliest episodes. And as I've said before, I'm a big fan of YouTuber Noah Gervais. And he does these very long-form discussions on games and series. So he's talked about the Fallout series. He's talked about the Red Dead Redemption series. Some of the Star Wars games. Some of the D&D based games. A lot of stuff like that. And his videos usually run between 3 and 7 hour epics.
Wow.
And he's an amazing writer. And I wanted to try to model a little bit of what I did on him. So when I wrote up my first episodes and recorded them, my first episode ever was on Castlevania. And I'm like, okay, I got a couple pages. I'll probably be going for 10, 15 minutes talking. And then I was done, and I was 4:59.
Yeah, it doesn't go that quickly with podcasting. We don't even have a script, and our timelines keep ballooning out massively every episode. So I couldn't imagine going in with a script and being like, wow.
Yeah, and then I'm looking at the playback time. I'm like, oh no, I've made a terrible, terrible mistake. But I published it anyway, and because I'd said what I had to say, and that was it. And I just kind of kept going. And after a while, I did get a few people we really appreciate that this is short. we honest to God appreciate it, because as you guys know, most podcasters, and like I said, this is wonderful, most podcasters can go well over that time. It's kind of expected.
No, what? No, what? No.
What's that?
No, we don't ramble. There's no fat to cut.
Yeah. So when I come in at like 5 to 20 minutes, people are like, "This is very short." Okay. And I know that's probably gotten me a lot of people going, "Oh God, this guy's only like, what is this crap?" I'm like, "Bit." So, but
I think it's great. Like
I tend to think a shorter podcast means the quality is more condensed.
Well,
As someone who creates too long podcasts,
you can get into it so much easier and just like,
yeah.
I'm just gonna do this for a couple minutes, and
Well,
I'm not sure about quality. I just sort of talk.
that's
was gonna say
podcasting.
the world moved big into short form content with
That's
like
true.
TikTok and YouTube Shorts and everything. There's a big market for that bite sized.
But it is also ballooning because, I mean, as Phil had described, like YouTubers have these massive like epics, these video essays that go on for hours, and I feel like a nice middle section, much like in the video game industry when mid-tier games kind of fell out, we need to bring it back.
Yeah, I've talked about a number of mid-tier games myself on my show, and I'm like, I'm getting older. I don't have time for these 100-hour multi-side quest things. I really would like a shorter experience. And like you kind of almost have to go like really searching these days for like a shorter to mid-tier experience.
yeah. So your podcast is going well then, right? You just started up a Discord channel or a server, and
I did. I literally just started it because I'm very, very bad with social media. I try to... I'm one of those people that I think I tend to overshare, so I've had to learn to like shut up on social media. But at the same time, I'm also like... I try to like do the best I can because I know my time is also limited. I love how everyone has like these amazing graphics they do every week. And here's what's coming up in the next month. I'm like, I wish I had the time to do all that. So I mostly try to get it out there by word of mouth and hope people listen. I consider it successful if any show I put out reaches 10 listens. Usually if I get to 20, then I must have done something really, really well. But if I get 10 listens, I consider it a success.
well, I consider it a success because I like to listen to it.
Well, thank you. I do appreciate. I appreciate everyone who does tune in every week and actually listens to what I have to say. I realize I'm just another dude with a microphone, talking about games, which is already a crowded market to begin with. And I know, like I say, I hear all the time is like everyone is, oh, here's this famous podcast that talks about games. Here's this other famous podcast. It's been going on for 10 years. And they go on and on about the industry. And I'm like, I'm not talking about the industry. I'm just talking about the things that stood out to me that I felt were important. And I just kind of want to say my piece.
I think you're doing something interesting and different in the space that is oversaturated, which is sort of similar to what I think, we try and do, which is like a lot of gaming content focuses on sort of strict reviews, where you're more exploring the time and the place and the feelings that you had when you were doing that, as opposed to, what we're doing where most anime, manga stuff is doing reviews, very similar to the game stuff. And what we're trying to do is sort of expand more on that and explore the meta of all of those. So I think there's definitely an overlap in that kind of, thought process. But I also think there's an overlap, and this is something I noticed, a couple months ago. It seemed like a bunch of your episodes in a row you were covering Japanese games. And I went, he's talking about a lot of Japanese games. I bet we could talk about that.
Yeah, I mean, that's really kind of like I started playing, the NES in the 80s. And as you guys know, that's really kind of most of what they got was Japanese games. So that's where all of us sort of cut our teeth. And I was always terrible at platformers. This is even my wife makes fun of me for this. I have still not actually ever completed Super Mario Brothers.
Oh, same. Well, not.
Yeah, I
Tried to play
literally...
it a million times, never
Yeah, same thing. Played a million times. I've fallen every hole. Every stage after like the second, I just die hideously every single time. So I was glad to know that, there were other games being made that featured more my aesthetic, and even if they were platformers, it was something I could tolerate, like Castlevania. I do love that series, the early ones especially, and they're still platformers, but, it's Konami. It's one of, I think, Konami's still better properties. My view on games changed in probably the early 90s when Final Fantasy IV came out, which was, as you guys know, it's 2 here, it's 4 in Japan. And I saw that in an issue of Nintendo Power. And I'm like, this looks really good, but this is also so different from what I play. And I just couldn't find a copy where I lived in Scranton, just the mall.
Wild
as
to
I
think
say
back
in
to
my
that
show.
time when it was just you don't know when this game is coming out, and it could just not be at your store or any stores near you, and it just becomes this mythic, fabled thing.
Exactly, and I couldn't find it. What I ended up doing is, I think the summer it came out, my parents took us, we went on vacation to Canada. And for reasons I don't quite remember, my father wanted to see the Canadian wilderness, because he was a big fisherman and stuff like that. So he's more interested in not going to cities, but going out there in the country. And we were around the city of Edmonton. And we went into the town, the city, one day, and I don't remember the name of the store we went into. It was kind of like an early version, like a Canadian version of like a Sam Goody or a Best Buy or something like that. They had a lot of just general audiovisual media, and they had a video game section, and I saw a copy of Final Fantasy II, which is 4, and I'm like, can I play this here? Because at the time I didn't realize that we were still Region 1, the United States and Canada and Mexico. I can buy it in any of those 3 countries and take it home and play it.
Oh, yeah.
So I bugged the hell out of my dad to buy this game. He's like, why can't you just get this at home? It's like, because Dad, I can't find it. He's like, fine. So he paid especially the Canadian pricing, which put it about like $70 or $80 back then.
They've had it rough since then, and still even now. I know it's rougher for us here in America, but Canada's always had it worse somehow.
And I brought it home, so that's why I said I thank Canada for getting me into Japanese RPGs.
Nice.
But I've talked about them. I've talked about a number of the Final Fantasy games, my opinions on it. A lot of Japanese style games or Japanese games. I had a spade of them for some time. One of the ones I didn't really like, and I say controversy in the lightest terms. I got a couple people that said, I thank you for your opinion, but I disagree, which was very civil. Again, speaking of Konami, my opinions on the first 2 Silent Hill games. I love the first one. The second one, I am in a minority. I actually don't like. I had a very adverse reaction to the plot and story.
Oh, interesting. I've never touched them, but I have just osmosis so much about them because they just seem so fascinating, and so many people are like, "Oh my gosh, Silent Hill 2 is like one of the second comings of video gaming." So I don't know I don't know how much we want to get into the weeds on that, but what not that I'm like defending it because like I've never personally taken it in myself, but like what stood out to you of like, first one, but not this one.
The first one, I loved it because it was just... I felt connected to the main character because he was a writer in this strange town that looked very much like the East Coast. Could have been anywhere between Maine and the Carolinas. And he was looking for his daughter, and it was very... It's not horrifying in the sense of blood and guts everywhere, but it's a lot of very good suspense, like a good Stephen King novel or something, like one of King's better novels or something like
dread.
That.
Yeah.
Dread, drama. The general look of it, which we all know that they had to do the fog effect because the draw distance of the PS1 and all that stuff. But they did it well, and it came out. And there was a real good sense of mystery. And however the game turns out, good or bad ending, or the goof ending, if you can find it. The UFO ending. I really liked it because I connected with it. And the first character, Harry Mason, was not like a professional mercenary. He was not a fighter. He's not a cop. So it was very different from the Resident Evil games. So he legitimately, this is, hi, I'm John Everyman trying to survive against a terrible, terrible horror show. The second one, the problem is a lot of the themes of the second one hit a little too close to home for me on a lot of points. I'm an assault survivor. I've always struggled with my weight, so they're having a character who was, his whole thing was he was overweight and then went crazy. I've had, my, bad relationships, watching my own folks get, like, having go through a bad divorce and having, like, the second character, go through this thing with his wife and his guilt of being there. And I just felt it pushed my buttons in the wrong direction. Whereas
Very
everyone,
understandable.
where a lot of other people in the world went, oh, this is fantastic. I went, no, this is pissing me off, but I don't know why. Years later, I find out, oh, it's because I have PTSD, and everything this game talked about is one of my specialty triggers. And so I don't give people guff for liking the game. I say, understand when you hear my review of it, know that I come from it from a very different perspective. And I had a couple people, come to me and say, we understand that, but still, the Japanese treat this flippantly anyway, man. It's just Japan. I'm like, that doesn't excuse them. That doesn't let them off the hook.
Yeah.
I'm glad we're in agreement here.
Yeah.
And I'm like, but I understand your point of view. Agree to disagree is not the best way to really say this, but it's more, I understand your point. Please just understand mine.
Yeah, you're coming at it from a very specific personal space. There's no like grudge or like this game's crap. It's just like this spoke to me differently than it spoke to you, and it spoke to me in a negative way insteid of
exactly
a positive way. Or
but then I turn around and do something like my review of Final Fantasy VII, and I love many of the Final Fantasy games. Final Fantasy VII, both original and remake, I really, really enjoyed. For different reasons. But, a lot of people are now like, I almost hate to say like the tide's turning against both games for different reasons.
Oh, wow.
Like, I kind of get the idea from like the underground chatter that the first Final Fantasy VII is now like, if it's not treated as sacrosanct, it's just overplayed. It's like, oh man, we hear too much about it.
And it kind of, as someone who doesn't really do JRPGs too much except for like some really specific ones, like if you hear this, like, because like I've been hearing about that since I was a kid, never played it, never had the opportunity, never had a PS1, but it's like when you hear about this again, similar to Silent Hill 2, it's like this game is the second coming, and you hear that for years and you finally touch it and you're like, this is it, this is, and not to say anything against it, but it's just, I definitely get that understanding of like, this is this golden idol of the video gaming community, and it's not for everybody. I know, like I said, JRPGs usually aren't my cup of tea, so it's not going to be... And also, I can't transfer myself back in time to, what was that, late 90s, early 2000s when it came out, and it was, like, technologically, like, mind-boggling, and now you're like, teehee, look at that Lego man walk around.
Pretty much.
I think that's a really good, the whole thing about doing these, I guess I'll say reviews, I'm not sure what a better essays, from that perspective of like, how did I feel back then going through it? Because there's so much stuff that was great when it came out, and it just does not hold up today. But like, if you put yourself back in that past mind space and explore it through that way.
I wanted to ask specifically when we got to Final Fantasy VII was growing up, to what extent were you aware that all this stuff was Japanese and localized, or did it just blend?
I was very aware that it was not a Western game. It did not come from the United States, Canada, Europe, something like that. So I had been very aware, even by style, by that point, because even before this, I'd started realizing that anime was a thing. I've been a lifelong artist. Like I started drawing, and I learned, like, accidentally back in the 80s that a lot of my favorite shows, like the Transformers, He-Man, the Thundercats, Ninja Turtles, although some of them were very American-based, most of that animation was done overseas. It was done either in Japan, or it was done in Korea, or it was done in Vietnam. And as a kid, I'm also a history buff. As a kid, at the time, I didn't know the sort of geopolitical climate that led to why all the animation was done overseas, like why we had the ability to do that, that it was cheaper, or because of World War II or ongoing conflicts that the United States had been involved in, that we had treaties, and it was kind of like, I hate to say, kind of throwing a bone to a lot of them because they worked cheap and they stayed consistent. But you realize, especially with like Transformers and stuff like that, and Voltron, which I had seen very early. Voltron I kind of looked at as unique because I didn't know what this was. It looked so different from the cartoons, but I loved it. Of course, early anime, because I didn't know things like Gundam was out there. I didn't know even like old things like Speed Racer and whatnot I had never seen before. And I knew that it wasn't Disney. It wasn't Warner Brothers. So it doesn't look like a Disney show. It doesn't look like Woody Woodpecker. It doesn't look like, Bugs Bunny, anything like this. So what is this thing that I'm seeing? And a lot of it was able to stay consistent, but it was still the 80s. So animation was not... Oh, God.
80s animation's not doing too hot in the West.
No.
A lot of that is rancid garbage that deserves to be left where it is.
Yeah, or even shows like, and I'm going to throw this one back, The Inhumanoids.
Yeah.
Which I had like
yeah.
some of the toys, and I didn't know what this was, and I only saw a few of it. I didn't know it was a whole bloody line of Japanese cartoons. The GoBots, I didn't know it was all Japanese. It was a ripoff of the Transformers. I didn't know Gen 1 Transformers was a slapdash of a whole bunch of product lines that just got packaged into one thing in the United States. So by the time I saw the first movie in 87, I was 10 years old with theater going, oh my God, Optimus. And not like realizing this, but I knew it wasn't us. But as I got older, I kind of kept my hand in it with, video games. And a lot of that, of course, was Japanese stuff because it was the Nintendo, then the Super Nintendo. I had a Sega Genesis, but a lot of that is very, very Americanized, so it was very different. While I consider myself
Sonic.
While I consider myself multi-console, I've always been, I tended to lean more towards the Nintendo side of things. So, of course, everything they mostly translated. And then after a while, I began to hear rumblings, as we all did, of this wave of animation coming from Japan. So, first it was mom and pop shops, and then when Blockbuster took over everything and Hollywood Video took over everything, I went in and was able to find more early days animation. And then it really put together that what I'm seeing in the video games is exactly what I'm seeing on celluloid as animation.
Yeah.
And
I had that exact same. Yeah.
So this confirms everything I had understood for a while. And even by the 90s, localization had got a lot better, but it wasn't necessarily the best.
Big correct. We're not even out of the woods of we need to Americanize this, but it's definitely there's a little bit more of an industry to it, but we're not kind of where we are now.
And the reason I asked specifically about Final Fantasy VII was like that is considered to be kind of a landmark moment, that and the PlayStation in general, of localization, where they stopped pretending it wasn't Japanese, because Japanese had been associated with like you said, throwing them a bone, like inferior products, not good material.
Yeah, it's again, because of my age, I do remember the majority of the 1980s. I remember Reagan. I remember Reaganomics.
I'm sorry about that.
Yeah, I was there. As I said to people when they laugh about Donald Trump now, I'm like, I remember being 12 in 89 and seeing jokes about him in newspapers and comics and things like that back then when he was, and I kind of learned, oh, this man's a scumbag. I'm not trying to get political, so if anyone's a fan of his...
You're good.
I apologize.
Fine company.
I knew from the time I was 12 this man was a piece of crap.
Well, people tend to forget that Donald Trump is not the first celebrity to ruin the country.
No, absolutely not. And don't forget, we had a movie star president in the 1980s.
Like I said, I'm sorry you were around for Reagan. I'm sorry I have to live in the fallout of Reagan.
No, I mean, I'm still alive.
Yeah, I'm glad we're all still alive for this.
But yeah, exactly. It was the long running joke that, And I didn't understand as a kid that, why people were down on the Japanese. I remember my own grandmother, who was, in her early teenage years when World War II started. So the only information she got about the Japanese culture, which she was a little Polish girl. Her parents were literally immigrants from Warsaw. They, she knew nothing about Japan and Japanese culture. So the only thing she ever heard was, the attack on Pearl Harbor, which, was in Hawaii, but she lived in Pennsylvania. So she, in her head, got this idea that the Japanese were coming and were going to bomb where she lived any second. And for the rest of her life, she was very hateful towards these people that literally had nothing to do with her, because she had been, told by the American media at a critical time in America's history that they're coming to kill us and you need to be part of the war effort. So, and me not knowing this, I'm a kid in the 80s.
Yeah, why would you? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I have no goddamn clue about this stuff. And here I come. And even still, we know from media back then, you see all the jokes about Asian stereotypes in movies. They're very straight-laced, only math. The English is very bad. They're kind of goofy because they don't understand. There was a famous movie at the time, and God help me, I don't remember it. It was, I know Michael Keaton was actually one of the stars, but it was a movie about, they were auto manufacturers in Detroit. And they got bought out by a Japanese company because, the recession and times had changed after the 70s. So now they had, this American culture of building cars suddenly had to conform to the Japanese method of doing it. And everyone, it was, culture shock and, Japanese people trying to live in America, having to leave their homes to go run this business out of, both their job and company loyalty, versus the American auto manufacturers coming in like a bunch of thugs from, with ironworking and all this crazy stuff. And eventually Michael Keaton has to be the man who finds common ground with these foreigners on American soil. And apparently this movie did pretty well. And God help me, I don't remember the name of it. You can probably find it out there. Gung Ho, thank you. Yes, that's the exact name of it.
That is the name for that movie. Wow.
And even as a kid, I'm watching this, I'm going, I don't really understand what the hell's going on here. I know there's supposed to be jokes, but I don't get it.
So this is a comedy?
Yeah, it was a comedy.
Because there's stuff in, I don't remember the exact era, probably the 90s if not the 80s, where it's like Japan's got their big economic bubble and American companies are going to Japanese factories to learn like, how do we make this happen in America, or these numbers and whatnot. So
yeah, and it's a lot of fiction at the time. That's one of the reasons in cyberpunk exists as it does, where a lot of the currency, there's a lot of heavy Japanese themes, and a lot of, in cyberpunk, money is now the yen or the new yen or something like this. Even William Gibson, Neil Stephenson, all those kind of talk, all those talk about it. Exactly, because of the Japanese bubble and people thinking, well, Japan's going to now run the world.
It's so crazy to think back to, because that's the same thing. I feel like some of the fear on that comes from like the deep-seated fear and hate from World War II growing into that, and it's like you skip ahead a decade or two after that when the bubbles burst, and now anime and Pokemon is everywhere in America, and it's like, as a kid, it's like, I can't even fathom the idea that I would be scared or feel from this country. They're making all this stuff that I love. We're buds. Like, that this deep-seated, like, fear. It's like, they're cool. Where is this coming from? Like, weird old people you'd find. But yeah,
it's a lot of boomer fears based on the Greatest Generation having, like, fought them in the Pacific. And I, like, now as an adult going, you have to understand that was such a different time. There was a war on, and you have to understand they were a country that allied with a nation who was thousands of miles away in Europe, who legitimately hated them. And if that nation had won, would have then killed them. Mm-hmm. But, America got to have the biggest penis in the room because it dropped 2 atomic bombs on them, and now said, guess what, we run the show.
I had such a similar experience. My grandfather fought in the Pacific. He was on a boat. He got hit by a kamikaze pilot. Mm-hmm. And when I started getting into Japanese video games and anime and everything, I didn't even know it was Japanese, but he did.
Yeah, they tracked it immediately. We were kids like,
Yeah.
oh, this is fun. They're like, no.
Oh, Piston Honda showing up at Punch Out must have been a real rough go for
No,
him.
this is he wasn't like super racist, but he was just aware that these were not American products. These were products coming in, taking more of like taking the American job sort of thing.
Yeah.
Like the auto factory.
So,
We're
so
buying-
this stupid routine about they're taking our jobs is not new. It's been around
Yeah.
for longer than any of us.
Hundreds and hundreds of years, if not longer.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
look
when
at the
I wanted
Chinese
to-
Exclusion Act of the 1800s. They're taking our jobs. This crap has been around forever.
when I wanted to start learning Japanese and everything, that my grandmother was like, "Oh, if your grandfather had lived to see this."
Well, funny you mentioned that. Many years ago, I dated a young lady, and she was again learning Japanese as well because she was very much into cosplay and anime, all this stuff. I've been to a couple conventions with her, so my Japanese is almost non-existent. I know a few words here and there, but I'm one of those guys that I'll watch the sub if I can, if it sounds pretty good. Usually I went with the dub. But she would just routinely, being young men and young women at that time, she would just go pak all the time at me. And I'm like, at first I didn't know what it is. And somebody translated for me. Like, then I turned around on her, what she did one day. I said, "What did you call me?" She's like, "Oh," I'm like, "Yeah, I now know what that means." And I don't appreciate it. And she's like, "Oh, okay."
That's funny.
The
So-
old baka.
Yeah. Well, and that's the easy one. you know.
Yeah.
Yep.
So, I believe you've spoken about this a little bit before about not really being into anime or manga or anything like that. Is there anything that you're into right now as far as anime or manga?
The funny thing is, back in the late 90s and early 2000s, I was all about it. I think over time, because kind of how my tastes have changed, it's kind of fallen off. I keep looking at it a little bit, going, okay, I like the idea, I like this. Just being an artist and myself, I enjoy a lot of the animation. I enjoy a lot of the art styles. I really I love what they're doing. I have noticed, of course, that I teach art in my day job, so I notice a lot of my students are very into anime, but also kind of like the direction anime has influenced now a couple generations worth of American artists. So a lot of what we get, even in American cartoons, has a certain influence.
Sure.
It's, they're still very much kind of like a little bit of Disney, a little bit of Warner, but they've been mixing it heavily with anime.
Yeah, there's a phrase going around that I want to popularize called hamburger shonen that describes American or Western made things that have a very clear anime inspiration in the vein of spaghetti western.
Yeah, exactly. No, you're actually 100%. I like that. I like that
I
phrase.
found that one and I'm like, it's captured this concept we've been trying to because it's like it's Western made, but it's anime, but also anime is fluing everything, but it's these particular ones, and it's just like that's it.
Yeah, no, exactly. I like that phrasing. So a lot of my students, obviously, most of they come in, "Mr. Morgan, you're an art teacher." I'm like, "Yes, I am," and I walk them through kind of the history of art as humanity-wise. So I try to hit every major culture, and I do talk about Japan at a certain point because I tried to point out to them. I had students, in fact, this last school year, where I showed them the original sort of the late Edo period, right before the Meiji Restoration, the trading cards that a lot of
the
artists
Hanafuda?
would make. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I showed them. I said, "Look, take a very good look at this," and then I put on like Dragon Ball or something like this, and do you notice any similarities, kids? And a few of them went, "Oh yeah." Most of them went, "No, I don't see what you're talking about, mister." And they go right back to their phones and they're
Showing me
playing.
two very ancient things. I'm a teenager in the year 2023.
I'm a teenager. Yeah, and I don't
What's
care.
Dragon Ball?
Exactly. And but a few of them got it, and I said, "This is a style that's been around forever." And I said the biggest influence the anime had was Walt Disney. In fact, a lot of, as you guys know, like a lot of the great animators of the last 50, 60 years, those of us who are still with them have turned around and said, yep, it's because after World War II, a lot of American GIs brought over Disney movies, and they were an influence. We just took them and modified them to our standard.
Oh, they already knew about them before World War II happened.
Oh, yeah, even that. But and
Disney
the kids
and
are like
Popeye.
Yeah,
Popeye
loves Popeye, and I don't have any idea why.
It's because of World War II. He was big with the sailors.
Yeah, exactly.
They brought those cartoons.
And the kids have been, a few of them who recognized it went, oh, mister, that's really been a thing? I'm like, yeah, Kurt, I hate to say it, the world has been around before you existed. Things happen. There's history for a reason. But I've also been interested, I try to talk to the kids culturally because I also see them adapting, as much as they love anime. It's a wonderful thing because it comes in, it can be, no matter who you are as a young person growing up in America, what your culture is, what your personal history is, I can always say, well, anime is a nice uniting influence. And then I've watched them actually begin to adapt some cultural things in anime as well. I watched, like I said, the students of mine who are African American. I've noticed that they've added a little bit of, African-American street culture to theirs. Students of mine who are Latino or Hispanic have been adding certain, sort of flair to that too. They've been bringing up stuff from Mexico that has come from, that is originally inspired by Japan, and it has a somewhat of a different look. It's very flavored. So I've kind of watched this interesting cultural evolution. But at the same time, I'm like, mister, do you watch Demon Slayer? And I'm like, no, I haven't seen that one. I mean, the most recent anime I think I've probably seen has been the Castlevania series on Netflix.
The Netflix.
I watched some. Yeah, I watched some episodes of Baki the Grappler.
That's a good one.
And a few other ones. I'm trying to remember what caught my attention, but the problem is I tend to, my brain anymore between all my hobbies and stuff like this, I may miss certain things and I have to try and go back. And I try to, they say, well, mister, what have you watched? And I have to kind of go back and say, okay, have you ever heard Cowboy Bebop? And they're like, no.
That live action anime, live action
like,
series
no,
on Netflix.
Dear God, no.
Sorry.
And I'm like, have you ever watched Adult Swim, a cartoon? No. It's like, oh shit. And in my head, I'm going, oh, that's right, because in 2001 when that came out, it's been 20 years, fool. You're old.
But it's Cowboy Bebop. Come on.
Back in my day, we used to have to wait until midnight to watch anime on the channel.
And I'm like, have you ever heard of Gundam? No. Have you ever heard of Trigun? No. Have you ever heard of Samurai Champloo? No. And now I'm going to start getting into the weeds, kids, because have you ever heard of Ninja Scroll? What's that?
I hope they haven't heard of Ninja Scroll.
Yeah.
Have you ever heard of what was that one? The one samurai horror one. Yoma Curse of the Undead. They're like, no. I'm like, have you ever heard of the Slayers? No. I go,
oh man.
I'm like, oh god, kids.
Death of the monoculture. Things keep moving. They're moving so fast.
I know, and I'm reminded how much time has actually passed. Like I said, the young lady I dated in the story, her big thing was Revolutionary Girl Utena.
Yeah,
and that is now a long time ago, and I'm like, oh god, I don't even. I realize I don't know how to even talk to these kids now in a unified language because I'm speaking a very old dialect as far as they're concerned. And the thing is, I'm not down on any modern anime. I've watched some of it. Some of it's really, very good. And like I said, I love the art. I love where they're going. It's just a part of me tends to go, the problem is I'm seeing the story beats because I've been around a while. And I've kind of noticed
that. Yeah, we definitely suffer from that.
Yeah, it's the same story beats are like Sword Art Online. Someone else asked me a question, like a game I was playing, when did you realize it was Sword Art Online? And I kind of know a little bit about it, but I'm like, okay, I see where he's coming from. I didn't think of it that way, and I'm like, okay, yeah. And I'm like, I feel with that one, it's like I'm watching some weirder version of Yu-Gi-Oh! When I see that sort of thing, and I'm like, okay, it's part of my brain is connecting to old things, and again, not down on it. I think I've been around long enough in the game where I'm beginning to watch newer stuff. I'm seeing their influences from older media within the genre. And I'm like, okay, I think I know where the story's kind of going here.
Yeah, this is their Dragon Ball. This is their
this is their Yu-Gi-Oh. This is their Cardcaptor Sakura. This is their this their Pokemon, because even though Pokemon's still around, obviously there's Digimon and there's a lot of other pet monster sort of things, and even some of the crazier stuff. I'm like, nope, that's Ninja Scroll because you're pulling beats from it. Because I've been there. Sorry, kids. And occasionally when I get to see, eventually they revitalize an old property, like somebody came out with they're trying a new Gungrave game. And I'm like, oh, Gungrave, God, I forgot this thing existed. I watched that series. Unlocked. Oh, yeah, exactly. No, I watched that whole series. I bought every single one of those DVDs when they came out at $20 a pop because it was the same guy who did Trigun. I'm like, okay, I love Trigun, so this Gungrave, the animation's great. This story's got to be going somewhere. And that whole story was a giant flashback of this guy's previous life as a gangster until he was killed. And then in the very first episode, we see him rising from the grave to do his revengeance. And 20 episodes in, the last two, they finally go, oh, and now he's an undead, and he goes out and gets his revenge, and then he walks off into the sunset. And I'm like, you had an entire series where I watched this man's flashbacks, which was mostly talking. In the very first episode and the very last episode, you do high, shoot 'em up bullshit action. And I paid $20 a pop for these, so I'm in quite deep.
Oh, yeah.
And this is all I get, huh?
Oh, gosh.
Oh, no, I'm done. And then 20-some years later, something's like a new Gungrave game, and I'm like, no, I ain't getting tricked a second time. Because I
burned them out.
No, I got burned enough. I want my money back. But this is,
well, I was just thinking, you had mentioned a little while ago, your students were talking about like, oh, did you see Demon Slayer? And I had this thought in my head, because you're probably not familiar with the manga at all. Would that be safe to say? I think there's something that you might be interested in there, because Demon Slayer, more than like almost anything else we've seen, there is such a drastic change from the manga to the animation. It's almost not even worth reading the manga at all. As someone who reads lots of manga, that's strange for me to say, because a lot of times I'm like, oh, the manga does this better. But the art is so much different. There might be something interesting there to like study as far as
it's almost an animation showcase.
Yeah.
They took what was kind of a blank slate and just this studio went nuts on it.
Because usually it's the other way around, because you can do designs in singular drawn pictures as a comic manga panel, then you can like, okay, now animate that in motion, and it's like, we got to simplify these designs, but
yeah,
it's a situation where we went the opposite direction somehow, despite going against the grain of the medium.
Yeah, I mean, and for me, manga's also been sometimes tough to find, because back in the day when I was more collecting comics and reading a lot more comics, if you were lucky, depending on which shop you had, and again, where I grew up was very small, so there were only like 2 or 3 shops in the whole area. Someplace like where I live now, you can get 3 or 4 different shops, and they now will stock manga as well as Western comics. Back then, they were a specialty order job, unless if you happen to find a piece here or there where like they over-ordered and not everyone bought up the stock, so you could grab a hold of one.
I love this so much. This is so like these two don't relate to this struggle because Kermit's too young and Brad got into it way too late.
Yeah, I got in when it was already in Barnes & Noble. I have a whiff of that thing of like, oh, I'm missing this one. But it never shows up. But not like straight up like, I can't find this. Like I'm just it's like in Barnes & Noble. Yeah, Brad's like.
I hate to say Barnes & Noble has actually been one of the best things for manga because you can easily go get it. Whereas when I was collecting, I'm like, it was almost like, you were trying to like go into a bookstore and asking, "Can I get the latest copy of Penthouse, please?" And, like, you get the same treat the same way. "Can I get the latest copy of the Slayers manga?" They're still handing it to you in the same brown paper bag.
Yeah, you got to go in the paper room where the special stuff is.
Yeah, because they're like, "You're ordering porn, aren't you?" They're like, "Oh God, no! I literally just want to know about this comic."
I found Akira Volume 3 in a Suncoast video.
Exactly, because they treated them the exact same way. Yeah. Oh my God, it was horrible. In fact, I got a story about that, but let me finish this first thought. So there was a manga I was collecting, and I cannot think of the name of it because they had to heavily translate it and actually do it where they had to now print it in reverse so I could read it left to right instead of leaving it as right to left. And maybe you guys can help me out with this one. It was a samurai epic. The samurai actually wore a swastika on the back of it, and they actually had to have a disclaimer at the front saying it did not have this connotation prior to 1945.
This is a Buddhist symbol. It's a manji. It's okay.
Swear to God, it's Buddhist.
It's not a Nazi thing. They had it before the Nazis. It's okay. Don't worry.
No, excuse me. We swear to Buddha.
Yeah, and he had to... it was a curse for him to keep living. His body was held together by these magical worms, and he had to kill 1,000 evil men before he would be allowed to die, finally.
Sounds bad.
And I enjoyed the hell out of it. And I know at some point that they had said they were going to translate it into an anime, but then I lost track of it. Blade of yes, exactly. Thank you.
Yeah.
And I lost track of it, so I never saw, because I was enjoying the hell out of it. But then I couldn't find copies anymore. And even I went to my store and I said, I'm willing to special order this. And they're like, yeah, like, dude, we're going to have to charge you like almost $20 an episode because we are really having a hard time getting a hold of this. And you are literally going to be the only one ordering it. I'm like, no, I ain't paying that much. That's like collector's levels.
Yeah.
It's like, there's like, hey, sorry, man.
And nowadays, that is in Sekiro from FromSoft, and everybody played it, and they don't know it references Blade of the Immortal. It makes me so mad.
I know,
you can't
absolutely.
throw her off without hitting a manga volume or an anime. I mean, not that people freaking buy anime DVDs really anymore. But.
Yeah.
Well, that's the thing. Like, Ben's talking about, when I was a kid, I had to do it, and I'm just like, what do you mean everything's online?
Yeah, I love Brad coming into the game way later when he's older than all of us, and he's just like, what, digital? He skips the line entirely. He has zero, despite being one of the older ones of our little trio, he has zero connection growing up being like, this is hard to find, or like,
not
I needed a
zero, but
copy.
Basically,
I started
especially
manga before I had broadband internet.
I have a shred of what Ben's story is and Phil's story. I have a little piece that I can go, it's somewhat like that. I know I had it better, but yeah.
Well, speaking of that, like I said, the story I tell is this. We had a friend of ours growing up who, after we all graduated high school, he went to Boston College. So there were a couple weekends we went up to visit. One weekend we went up to visit, from where I am in Pennsylvania to Boston is about a 5-hour drive. So on a Friday, a buddy of mine and I, after work, we drove up to Boston, and we hung out at their dorm at Boston College. They let us in. He was hanging out. So that Saturday, we wandered around Boston, just looking at the sights, seeing things, getting the Massachusetts experience, long before it's, a radiated wasteland. But I found a Japanese anime and manga shop. And it was like in a second floor walk up in an old, 200-year-old building, rental space. Didn't have an elevator, so we're walking up what I looked like, this, burned out stairwell in this building that was turned into storage space. The kind of stairwell where it's not taken care of, and there's obviously a guy sleeping on the second floor when nobody's home because it has easy access. You can get in, get out of the weather. And we go into this place, and we're literally on wood plank floors. This guy's just got racks of all this stuff, specialty. The owner is, again, he's Asian, so he knows what to get in, knows what to order. And I bought a couple VHS copies of the Slayers that I had missed in Suncoast. And I'm like, okay, I can fill in the blanks and watch these now. My friend who's with me buys a couple copies of La Blue Girl.
Oh, no.
And
that is porn.
I looked at the back and I went... And he's like, no, man, this is going to be awesome. I'm like, Look, I know you're into. I know you're into
in
this
some way, yeah.
I'm not going to be watching this with you because you're going to be watching it with your pants off, and I'm not going to be there for that. Sorry. And so we go to the counter. We're buying. I'm paying first, and he is right behind me. So I put down my stuff, and I'm paying for it. And the shop owner's there. He's talking to me. He's like, "Oh man, it is so awesome when this scene happens, and she gets into this, and this happens." And I'm like, "Yeah, Slayers is really awesome." And he's like, "No, I was talking to your buddy about the Blue Girl. It was awesome. It was awesome when she got raped in the scene by that tentacle."
Jesus.
And I stood there like with my mouth open and my eyes wide. I'm like,
What
I'll
do you-
take my purchases and friggin' leave now, thanks. And he's like, "What? What's
Yeah.
wrong, dude?"
Yeah.
And my
I
friend was
like
like,
it for the ninjutsu.
"Yeah." And my friend was like, "I mean, that's what we came to see." And I'm like, "No, get me the hell out of here.
Yep.
That's what we came
This
to
is
see.
this is bullshit. Get me out of here. This is like, your thing is your thing, but this ain't for me."
Yep.
Well, now you can go to Barnes and Noble or Best Buy or whatever, and you can pretend to be respectable when you buy your
When you
anime
buy your
and
manga.
Absolutely. And they don't hand it to you in a brown paper bag.
No, but
is
they
nice.
do. They do have actual like Arrow comics in Barnes and Noble in plastic wrap now. I never thought I'd see the day.
It's softcore. What?
Yeah.
It's not the Blue Girl, I'll give you that. But
Yeah, it's like I can go. It's Barnes and Noble. I can go down and walk like 50 paces and go pick up a copy of Cormac McCarthy's Blood Meridian and go, "Wow, this is way more horrifying." And they're just letting the kids have that.
I'm pretty sure they said Bibles in Barnes and Noble.
Yeah, they do as
get
well.
away with books because no one reads books.
Yeah,
If you got a
exactly.
picture.
Yeah. If you get a picture, that's where it gets really bad.
So, I wanted to touch on this. I want to make sure we can get to this. A lot of the games that you've covered have had some kind of connection, sometimes completely directly, with Dungeons and Dragons. And I know you had talked a little bit about your experience with that. Something that we've covered before is how a lot of the Dungeons and Dragons stuff has sort of gone back and forth with Japan. How Japan has gotten an edition and then they didn't get more editions, and so they sort of took it their own way. And then many years later, a lot of those ideas, because you have these separate branches, and then it sort of like comes back together and everything.
Yeah, like in the first D&D edition, the art of the orc was like a pig snout.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that stuck in JRPGs forever.
It did. I mean, historically, the concept of Dungeons and Dragons as it was, and this was even in the 80s when TSR owned it before it was owned by Wizards of the Coast and Hasbro. They got like first edition, and it was a hard sell in Japan. It was, well, not that it wasn't a hard sell here. I mean, you guys are not old enough to remember the Satanic
Oh,
Panic.
I do
of
know
the
about
80s.
it though. Yeah.
Yeah, it's more of a historic footnote. I actually had to go through it where, literally our local newspaper was printing pictures of, I don't know where the hell they found it, quite frankly, of people in black robes stepping out of a van, literally printing in the local news, "Your kids are about to be kidnapped and sacrificed in a cemetery. If you see this van, call the police."
Sounds rad.
And none of this happened. It does. I mean, it's like we were kids. We were going around looking for these vans, going, "Okay, where are these dudes?
I want
We
to
can't
get
find
a
them."
free trip to the cemetery. That sounds great.
Yeah, none of this happened. None of this was real. It was a terrible conflagration about one woman in California who had made a terrible, terrible lie to get famous, and then the religious right took it and ran with it. Mm-hmm. And
It's a good thing that's the last time that ever happened.
Oh yeah, no, that never happened. We all learned our lesson. But the things all I love: D&D, video games, heavy metal. All of this is now, "Oh, you're going to burn forever,"
Yeah.
and you're obviously in a cult because you like these things. And I'm like, no, excuse me, I don't know what the hell you people are talking about. But D&D was a hard sell in Japan, and what they took from it is they really kind of had to upsell it. And Japan was actually one of the first countries that would do what we call now the actual play. They would actually get together and record as an audio drama people playing D&D.
Whoa!
In
I've
fact,
never heard of this.
the series Record of Lodos War is directly influenced. It's D&D. It is a D&D game that they played that they turned into an anime.
I did not know that.
Yes, that's
I didn't
what
know that
is.
was the
now,
origin.
Japan has since developed its own different anime and TTRPG systems because it's D&D is a little too westernized for them. This stuff, I forget what it's called, as I actually only learned of it recently through another video. I think it's a guy on YouTube called William SRD. He talked a bit about it, but and there's a couple other folks mentioned it, that Japan has its own TTRPG systems, but D&D is still the grandfather. It's still there, and sometimes they got additions, sometimes they didn't. One of the biggest things that they did was what's now known as the Chronicles of Mystara games, which are two very wonderful, and I highly recommend them. You can actually still get them on Steam as the Chronicles of Mystara. It's two games, Tower of Doom recently. And Shadow over Mystara.
And on sale.
They're constantly on sale. Sometimes they'll be part of the Capcom Beat 'em Up collection because it was Capcom who put them out. And they are literal beat 'em up RPG lights. In that, it is very much Capcom, so of course they have a history with Final Fight, Street Fighter, all those great games. And they took the concept of your side-scrolling, belt-scrolling beat-em-up, and they actually added RPG mechanics. So you have a character that literally levels up after the end of the stage, or after a couple stages, and you get actual gear, you get magic weapons, you get magic armor, you can collect things, you get treasure that stays with your character. It progresses with them. So you get to literally complete the game way stronger. Even if you have to stop, the game remembers that you had this. And back in the arcade days, it was novel because in the arcade games, the arcade game literally remembered it. If a different person came in, the leveled up fighter that had extra gear because they got further, well, you could restart the game and have all the additional gear. It was literally you were leveling an RPG along with a beat 'em up. And it never did well in the arcades. I got lucky that I think I did actually at one point play a little bit of Tower of Doom and Shadow, like by complete accident, and the arcades never did well in my area, so eventually they got replaced by something else. And I think it was they got released on the Saturn in the late 90s as a collection. But then it disappeared, and it wasn't until 2014 that they were both released as the Chronicles package. And it's an interesting history because when Capcom of Japan ended up getting the license to produce D&D games, they didn't know what to do with it. So they kind of looked around at each other for a while, and they went, anyone in the room know what this is? Dungeons and Dragons? No clue. Shit, what do? We have a property on our hands we got to do something with now to make money. So they literally had a company-wide sort of casting call. Does anyone know what the hell this is? And by complete accident, in Capcom USA, one of their low-level employees, and Alex Jimenez, I believe is his name, stood up and said, "Hi, I know what D&D is. I have a weekly game and I run it." And Capcom Japan went, "Come to us and explain what the hell is going on." And this guy was like a QA tester. He was pretty low down on the totem pole. And suddenly gets rocketed into this director's position because he's the only one in the company that stood up and said, "I know what D&D is and here's how it works." And literally the Tower of Doom was the sketch that Capcom Japan had come up with a story. Alex took it home, ran it for his home group.
Whoa!
And then gave notes to Capcom that said, here's what we liked, here's what we didn't, here's what worked, here's what didn't, here's the changes you need to make. And Capcom went, "Awesome, thank you for your time, congratulations, you're now the director."
That's so cool.
And yeah, that's how we got Tower of Doom and Shadow of Mystara, and how actually Alex became a high up in Capcom Global, was because he knew what D&D was.
That seems wild
lucky
to me that they didn't know, because unless my chain of events is wrong, because maybe it's something pre-D&D, but D&D is one of the formations of Dragon Quest. Like, you have off from school and work, Dragon Quest is coming out, like, and that is so... That's D&D.
Yeah.
Edition 1.
Yeah, Dragon Quest, the initial Final Fantasy, they're all D&D. They're literally D&D based.
Exactly. It's wild.
But again, it's one of those things where it was so scattershot in Japan that it was extremely underground, and not because it was terrible or had, cultural implications or was a religious thing. It was this goofy thing from America that just didn't know what to do with, and it wasn't part of their culture. As we know, Japan has a lot of mythology and whatnot. It just doesn't conform to the D&D method, which is very, very based on Western style of warfare, which is based on an old game called Chainmail, and then based on the Lord of the Rings on top of it. So a very Western idea of how fantasy fiction works, which is why, it came to us and went, this makes no sense to us. And then once it started to take off, they went their own direction, which is why a lot of Japanese fantasy in the modern age, it's the joke in the RPG is that a bunch of friends get together to go kill God.
Yep.
Yep.
Whereas in Western style, it's a bunch of friends to get together to go loot treasure out of the Lich's castle.
It's an adventure and not like,
It's not like this epic quest of meaning. It's just like, okay, we're going to go get rich. And they know, obviously, Japan knows what D&D is now. There's many people who play it. It's just back then they just didn't know what to do. And Capcom literally just did that with this license. Now, eventually the license is transferred because, Hasbro is Hasbro, and they kind of don't want competition clauses. And apparently Hasbro and Bandai Namco don't like each other because they're in the same business and it's a competition clause. But yeah, we got a few D&D video games that are straight out of Japan, and it's the Chronicles game. You can look at it and go, "Oh my God, this is anime D&D. This is literally what this is."
I haven't started playing it yet, but I'm looking forward to it.
I think you're going to enjoy it. I mean, I loved it, but then again, I love a beat 'em up. So a lot of my history with beat 'em ups are again.
There's another
Japanese
game
properties.
that's just like that, made from Japan, that's got gorgeous artwork, that the name is just... That came out, not like, I guess now a while ago, but like, I am just looking on the name. It's like gorgeous artwork. I feel bad that the major thing I remember is that a lot of the women character archetypes are massive.
Yeah, exactly. It's
Why can't I think of the name? But like, you describing it, like, that's what that is. Like, that is literally...
Yeah.
In that vein, a beat 'em up that is also D&D, that you level up, you get equipment, you go to the places, you meet the characters. Why can't I think of what it's called?
It's Dragon something. I just saw it because a local secondhand game store shop of ours here in town has a copy of like the deluxe edition for $24. I haven't gone in to pick it up yet. It's not Dragon's Dogma. It's not
Dragon's Dogma is also a very D&D-y game.
Yes, also extremely. It is literally one of those games where they said, okay, Elder Scrolls, let's do a Japanese version.
It is Dragon's Crown.
Dragon's Crown.
I just Googled
yes.
it. I have the benefit
Dragon's
of not
Crown.
being locked in my sound cube without my phone. I can Google things during an episode.
No, it's very, again, it's obviously a very Western version of anime, and which is, I think, why back when it came out, Dragon's Crown was like, oh, this is sexism because look at these women's characters. I'm like, okay, I see where you're coming from. But for the love of God, can we just take a 30-second on this to say the artwork is awesome? We haven't had a solid beat 'em up in over a decade. Now you can go on with your standing on your soapbox. I'm guilty too. It's not like I haven't stood on a few soapboxes on my own show. But can we at least give ourselves 30 seconds to go, this is pretty, and somebody tried to revive a dead genre of game? Okay, now go. Now go off on your anger spree. Please. I won't be listening, but enjoy yourself.
That actually that's a good segue into another point I wanted to bring up.
Oh boy.
So
Brad, okay.
Something I really like about your show is how much you don't get along with mainstream. something that we also have touched on quite a lot is, don't interact too heavily with the anime community. And so I think there's an interesting parallel there as far as like, yeah, the mainstream of these communities it's not great. And I like that, I think I've described it as the contentious relationship.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not trying to be an ass. I'm really not. I'm just old enough to realize that I've seen this before with console wars and Gamergate and all kinds of real, and I apologize if you guys don't generally swear, but a lot of bullshit, quite honestly, that I don't have time for. I mean, hate is the idiot's weapon, and a lot of people show their ass real quick when they open their mouth. I've also unfortunately been around enough fandoms to realize that fandoms can get toxic very easily.
Yep.
And I don't just mean toxic positivity.
Yeah.
I just mean toxic in general. And where 2 or 3 people are gathered in my name, someone's going to make an absolute shitpost. It's just a matter of I'm tired, I'm old, and I just don't have time for the miasma of anger and hate and oh really, because character X did this, Y, and Z, how do you not have this memorized? I'm like, because I have to try to remember my bank account number, not what character X did in season 3 when he was scratching his asshole on the way to the boss fight. Sorry, I got other stuff I got to do, and it gets a lot much. It's not just a little much; it gets a lot much. And I remember even back when I would go to conventions. I've only been to a few anime ones. I was to one. I was at the one in Maryland that's every year that I'm suddenly blanking on.
Otakon?
Otakon, yeah.
Yes.
I always say Otakon because Metal Gear Solid.
Yeah.
Thank you very, very much. Otakon for the year 2000, and I went to Katsucon in 2001. And again, old man yells at cloud here, but those were wonderful to sort of see that there was so much love for this genre that for me was a strange thing. I finally get to meet people from across the country who love this thing that I love. But then I began, real quick, I began to notice it's got a dirty underside.
Oh, yeah.
Where it's absolutely people who oh, you're not dressed like this character. Oh, Shaniqua, don't you tell me you don't have this exact thing. I'm like, slow down. Slow down, first of all, son. Don't address me like that. Don't come at me.
Please do not Shaniqua me.
Yeah. 2, I love this thing and you love this thing. We can find common ground in that. You don't get to gatekeep based on the degree to which you feel I need to be vetted.
Yep.
And, I'm Mr. Generic White Guy from Middle America. But there are people who love this who already are coming into this going, historically being marginalized, and now you're additionally marginalizing them for not liking this the same way you like this thing. And I'm like, I can't tolerate this. This isn't right. I'm maybe it's just me. I tend to, I realize that life is not fair, but I do try to be just. I try to say this isn't right. And but the problem is, for me, I just have to step away from fandoms because I realize I'm fighting against a tide of hardcore idiots who really believe what they're saying and a legion of trolls who thinks it's funny to just keep poking the bear and being harmful to people. And I feel real sympathy for people who just love the thing, no matter their degree of how much they're into it, whether it's their personality or their lifestyle, or if they're just a casual enjoyer or anywhere in between, who just want to get there for the love of the thing. And then they have to walk into this snake pit of weirdness and sometimes misogyny and sometimes sexual assault and sometimes, name calling or having to say, oh, you like this character? Name 3 things they did, then I'll believe you. I'm like, what are you, 5? Knock it off. At this point, it's not even kids doing this. It's grown-ass adults.
Oh, yeah.
None of them have
And
an
I'm like,
excuse, but the adults definitely don't.
Yeah, I mean, I can see if you're like a 13-year-old who doesn't know your backside from a hole in the ground, and you're like, okay, kid, someone's going to push your face in the second you get in the door in high school because they're not going to take this very well. But someone who's 25 and has a job or in their 30s and has a family, and you're still doing this?
No
what
patience.
in the hell is wrong with you? You are just a nightmare on society.
It's
I
definitely
used to like the anime conventions because you could get things there that you couldn't get anywhere else.
Mm-hmm.
Like the artist alley was cool, the merch tables were cool, but I was never really into the panels. And it was sort of the same thing with like horror conventions or any of that.
Mm-hmm.
But then once the internet came along and I had access to the items I wanted to purchase everywhere, I just left all that behind because it came with, it's like you said, it comes with so much like elitism and gatekeeping and just weirdness, where it's like, I like this thing and that makes me special. And if you like it and you don't like it enough, then you're taking away from my specialness. And I have to attack.
Yep. And on my show, that's kind of, I feel, I'm not trying to be petty, but I feel like I get a chance every once in a while to go, I have a pin, and your lovely little thing is a soap bubble. Pop. Now I'm going to give it to you from someone who isn't tied and does not care enough to save your specialty little feelings, reverse snowflake, or whatever you are, little privileged asshole. Because, not saying that I don't have games are an entertainment medium. I know they're expensive, and you do have to have a certain amount of capital funds to enjoy them, which leads to a certain amount of privilege. A lot of kids who I teach, the family bought an Xbox and it cost them a lot. It cost them food, it cost them bills, just so Johnny or Susie can play a game, and it's like the one game you'll get all that year, and to enjoy the thing. So I know, being able to cover the games I do or talk about a few games in a year or several games a year, I know that I have a certain amount of privilege, but that doesn't give me an excuse to treat other people badly, or that doesn't give me to say, oh, you don't agree that, Final Fantasy VII is the greatest topic on earth. Or I liked it, but I may not liked it the same way you did, but you're perfectly valid in your agreement or your disagreement. I'm just going to give it to you from my perspective, and then have people turn around and go, well, we're just going to flog that off because my opinion's better than your opinion. No. That's not how that works. Everyone's opinion is either valid or not. I mean, you can say a certain few opinions, and I'm not going to say this is not crazy thought. If someone says, I like this because they killed this section of people and they, did terrible things to these women, so awesome a game, and that's my opinion. No,
yeah, that one's not valid. That one's not valid.
Yeah, that was.
There
not
are
valid.
ones that are not valid. That's one of them.
Yeah, you can shut up and go bury yourself in a nice deep hole. But if I'm sitting here going, well, I thought this character was interesting, but I didn't quite like this, and here's what this on, and have someone turn around and go, well, you're just a fan because you're a fan of Sony, or you're just, you like that because all of you people, I love the phrase
you people. What do you mean, you people?
You people. Yes, open up, please tell me your story. What do you mean by that? Now you're talking a difference of opinion. Now you're just being an idiot, and what validity you would have had, you just flushed.
Well, there's the thing that's going on with like Diablo 4 right now, where it came out and a bunch of people were like really enamored with it, like the honeymoon phase, and gave it 10 out of 10 reviews on Metacritic. And now there's a bunch of ARPG fans who are finding problems with the end game and everything, and they're going on Metacritic and giving it 0 out of 10.
Yeah.
To counteract the 10 out of 10s. And it's like,
why?
Just give it what you actually think. Like, there's no way it's a 0 out of 10 game. It's like a 0 out of 10 game doesn't work, you know?
Yeah.
Where it doesn't run.
Yeah, it's totally broken. It never should have gotten past the QA phase. People are just being so ridiculous. And every once in a while, I get to go, hey, here's my thought. You're probably not going to like what I'm saying. So I'm assuming I must have, they listen to 30 seconds or a minute or two, and then there's a huge drop off because I said something they didn't like.
We don't look at how long people listen.
Yeah.
Number goes up. That's all that matters.
Yeah, Brad loves number go up. He shows us the graph all the time.
occasionally I will have, like, in the podcasting circle that I'm in, occasionally I will have a couple of my other guys go, like, they'll grab something out of there, like a joke I made, and they think, oh, that was actually a really good one. I enjoyed that. Like, I jokingly, I released one of my most recent episodes. I did a review of Final Fantasy VII Remake. And I jokingly described the characters as I said, oh, it has all the tropes. It's got the blaxploitation character, the wise child, the useless character, and the angry man with the giant sword. And then I said, then it was Sephiroth. But, I said, I described Aerith and Tifa as, the woman with a heart of gold and the head full of air, and the other girl with the heart of gold and the bra full of jiggle. And one of my fellow podcasters in the circle quoted that at me in one of the Discords, and he's just laughing at me the whole time. And I'm like, well, I said what I said, dude. And he's like, no, it's all good. I get it. And like I said, a couple of the other ones have been like, you said this, expand upon this quite a bit. And I'm like, okay, I'll give you a little bit more of a breakdown. And then I've met a few other people in Discord of like, well, just because you came in with this pedigree, it's like, it's not good enough for my pedigree. And that's how they kind of came off, like a complete asshole. It's like, look, I played this game too in the TTRPG space. This is also additional gatekeeping. I don't have the time for this crap anymore. And then
you want to talk about credentials? I'll break out my credentials.
The most startling reaction I had was, and I think Brad, you may have commented on this as well, when I put out my review of Alan Wake. I kind of talked around the background of not only when I was playing Alan Wake and my concept of it playing through essentially a thriller, not quite survival horror, but a thriller very much in the original sort of the Japanese written, like, obviously a lot of these have, like, an influence from Resident Evil 4.
Yeah.
When it came out in 2005. And the general look and the, and it's not just Alan Wake. It was like, the later Resident Evils, Resident Evil remakes, so the recent remakes of 2, 3, and 4, Dead Space, all these games.
Yeah, there's
Gears of War, all have the Resident Evil 4 look.
Bunch of knockoffs.
Which Alan Wake did. Yeah. But it's more of a thriller.
Yes.
And it's especially when you have a guy quoting Stephen King in your opening sentences. But I enjoyed it. I thought it was a really good game. I'm glad we're getting a sequel finally after these many years. And some people like that game. Some people don't. They thought it was too slow. But I had to tell the background of it because at the time I was playing it, I was going through some stuff. I was deciding, I had written some novels that had failed and gone nowhere. I've been trying to get in the comics industry for years on my own. And I was having no success. And I'm like, well, I'm married now. I have responsibilities. I guess I'm just another failed artist. I just have to consign myself to working in factories. And then this is where it is. You make stuff on nights and weekends, and you bury it in a closet. You bury it in a drawer, and when you die, someone comes and cleans out all your stuff and throws it away. And that's where most art ends up. That's where most creativity ends up, unfortunately. And I was kind of doing it, but at the same time, I also had a pet who got very sick and died of cancer. And he was kind of my buddy through this whole thing. And I told that story of Samson the cat and his, like, a couple days before he died, I had a dream involving him and Alan Wake. And I had several people come back and said, you son of a bitch, I never thought I would cry in a video game review of Alan Wake.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I didn't intend to do that, folks. I'm sorry. I just told my truth, and I kind of talked this little story because it was an odd sort of side note to this game that I enjoyed. And sometimes that's, I think, where my change versus the concept of the rest of the gaming world is in, because a lot of them want to do straight up reviews, and they want to do straight up reviews of the most current thing. Or if they're going to go back to a game, and no shade on nostalgia, they're going to say, okay, it was created by this studio and this director, and it had sold this many units and this and da-da-da. And I just played it recently, and I had trouble in this stage. And I'm like, I'm also coming back to this guy as going, yeah, I played these games. Legit, I did. But oftentimes, to get the next system up, I had to sell the previous system and all the games. So sometimes I have to go to Wikipedia and go, okay, it's been 20, 30 years, jog my memory. And then I go, okay, now I remember this, and here's where I was at, here's what went on. And, some people are like, well, that's nice, I guess. If you old man sort of remembers it, good for him. And he did a very short, thing about it. And other people are like, wow, thanks for letting me know. If I can find a copy of this, I may want to try it out. And that's kind of, I feel, what I get to do.
A lot of the younger people coming up making, content they want to be streamers or they want to be game designers themselves, and they're trying to do like that industry inside. And then there's a separate community, and these are the kinds of game reviews I like to watch, where they talk about the game as an art, how it made them feel. Mm-hmm. Did it, if a game is not, you can have a game that doesn't have the tightest design or the best graphics or plenty of glitches, mm-hmm. but it's still, it evoked something for you in a particular moment in your life. And that's an interesting review to read.
Yes.
Let me see it through your eyes.
I one of the early stories I told, and I'll kind of, so I don't end up rambling here, was a very, very old and kind of obscure NES game called Werewolf: The Last Warrior. And it is most known in the gaming zeitgeist now because of the end screen, which is literally a werewolf holding an American flag. Because that got added post-production by the American translation team. But the basic of the game is that you're a werewolf in the post-apocalyptic time trying to stop a mad scientist. And you get so many power-ups. It's kind of like an altered beast, where you start out as a human dude, you get a power-up, and suddenly you turn into this rampaging beast with hooks for claws, and you gotta climb a ceiling. It's not a great game. It's not good. But it's obscure, and kind of some people, even if you poke around YouTube, you're finally starting to see a few people like talk about it. And the thing I enjoy the most about it is because I've never been a huge horror fan, but not like slashers, like, Freddy, Jason, all that stuff. But I like the universal monsters, so Dracula, werewolf, all that stuff. And one of my favorite horror monsters is the werewolf. So I got to say, I get to play a game where I get to be a werewolf, one of my favorite monsters. And again, it's a Japanese game. I forget even who was responsible for putting it out at this point. I don't know if it was Namco or Data East or something like that. One of those like really, really old studios. And I didn't have a copy at my local game store, which was at our local mall, which I call the mall in my series. So it was like literally in this store was like a KB Toys was where we got our video games, because we didn't even have like a Toys R Us yet. That came in the early 90s. We had Toys R Us, and this was a few years before. So I'd read about this as a snippet in Nintendo Power, like literally a 1-paragraph review. Hey, this is coming with something. So for months I was calling the store. I was going to check. I was hounding it just to see if I could find a copy. And I know the release date finally got late, and it was never there. So 20 minutes down the road is, like I said, I was born and raised in Scranton. 20 minutes down the road is Wilkes-Barre, is our other town. So they have a mall. I just call it the other mall. And obviously I'm a kid. It's like 87 or 88, 89. I'm nowhere near being able to drive. So I kind of had to annoy my parents to go take me to the other mall to hopefully look for this. And my father's like, we have a mall right here. What's the problem? I don't want to drive the 20 minutes into the quote-unquote bad part of town. Meaning there were 2 black people that lived there, which so therefore the bad part of town. Plus he was also worried because the Susquehanna River ran through there, and in 1972 Hurricane Agnes had come through, flooded half the valley, and he was like, I don't want to get trapped on the other side of the river. Dad, it's 1989. We haven't had a hurricane like that in decades.
The mighty Susquehanna.
Yeah, exactly. That's literally the mighty Susquehanna. And I was like, I don't want to get trapped on the other side of the river. And like, even when I was like living there in the early to mid 2000s, the late 2000s, before I moved where I live now, he was like, are you sure you don't want to be, that's the other side of the river. I don't want you to get stuck in case there's a flood. I'm like, Dad, we have flood control. U.S. Army Corps has come through. They fixed it. They have levees. It's not 1972. I wasn't around in 72, Dad. You don't forget. I remember you were there. My mother tells it you were there too. So I was not there for that. But I I finally convinced my mom and my grandmother to drive down to the other mall, a whole 20 minutes away. A whole 20 minutes.
20 minutes.
Longest drive ever to get down to the other mall. And the other thing is, thankfully, my grandmother was like, "Nah, honey, I'll go down with you. There's a store down there I want to check out." So my mother's like, "Fine, we'll go." And I called beforehand, and they had one copy of the game in their KB Toys. So I ran in with my money, I paid for it, and I was like giddy. And I talked to the kid I was like 11 or 12, and the store clerk was a disaffected 20-something who was really like waiting for his smoke break and, sad that he didn't get to be, in a hair metal band and
just done with it.
Was living in PA in this shit town, waiting to smoke and go hang out with his buddies and drink in the countryside that night. And he was like, "Yeah, kid, whatever." I took the money, he ripped it out of my hand, he flung the game at me and said, "Thanks, kid." But I didn't care, so I went home and I played this game, and it sucked. I had been so hyped, and it wasn't good. But I'm like, gotta eat it, and I've got to play this thing.
Yep.
So that's why it stuck with me. Yeah, I spent the money, and that's why it stuck with me. It's just the whole saga behind where I went to get through is just to realize that I'd hyped myself up to a product that was very good. And I've said many times in my own show is that when I watch people now getting hyped about certain games, whether they're Western games, whether they're Japanese-style games, so, friends in my podcast circle who are getting hyped for things like Fire Emblem and Xenoblade 3 and, even Tears of the Kingdom from the New Legend of Zelda, and they're like, "Oh, man, we did this!" And I'm like, calm your expectations. I'm sure it'll be good, but it's not the second coming of Christ. Yep. The same thing with people looking at things like Starfield and whatnot. "Oh my God, it's going to be the greatest goddamn thing ever." I'm like, calm yourself down. I'm sure it will do well, but there's going to be people that don't have the same opinion or don't want it or aren't interested. And now you're like, "If you don't get this, you're the biggest piece of shit on earth." I'm like, it's a game. It's a video game. It's not food. It's not water. It's not shelter. Calm yourself. Take a lesson from an old man who got himself overhyped when he was very young and impressionable and went, "Oh, I kind of made a bad choice, and now I regret it." That's why I put the story out. Here's a whole game involving buyer's remorse, and this is why it stuck with me.
Yeah,
I think that's
Oh, no. I'm sorry. Go on.
Well, I was gonna.
Yeah, I know it's getting about time.
Brad, you were gonna say that seems like a really good story to end on because it was a really good story to end on.
No, I think that's a good anecdote to end on. I think that that's something that a lot of people can learn a lot from, especially considering how much we talk about entertainment on both of our podcasts.
We get excited about new things, but we always make sure that we know it's not going to be the second coming.
Yeah, I mean, I do get excited too, but I try to say, "Okay, Phil, you're getting a little amped. Chill. Yep. You've been through this before. Chill."
Well, thanks for listening to this special episode of That Time I Got Reincarnated in the Same World as an Anime Podcaster. Thanks so much to Phil for joining us. Do you want to tell us a little bit about where people can find you and what you've got coming up?
Awesome. Yeah, definitely. I can be found at Deleted Saves. My podcast is on most podcatchers. The biggest ones I do is Spotify and Apple, but most every other podcatcher has some point of my show. It's hosted on Anchor, so you can go to Anchor directly if you want. I can be found at Deleted Saves on Twitter, which is where I do a lot of my really quick opinions. I am on Instagram at deleted_saves_podcast. I do have a Patreon. I'm at Deleted Saves Podcast on Patreon. I'm really cheap. I only have two tiers, a $1 and a $2. $1 will get you a lovely shout out and you get to vote on stuff, and eventually I will do everything I promise. It's just a matter of time. And any kind of money goes directly to helping me and the show maintain things, so I definitely appreciate it. It's not required, but I definitely appreciate it. And I have very recently started a Discord server. It's Deleted Saves on Discord. And you can try and tell me I'm wrong about something. Or try to tell me I'm right. Or like most people, maybe you'll just say nothing at all. And I get to hear the crickets chirp. But that's generally where I can be found.
Great. Thanks. I hope everybody checks out your podcast. As I have said before, I've been listening to it for a while. I really enjoy it. And it's a nice little, it's like a little bite. You know, you spend a couple minutes on it and you get that, especially if it's a game you played before, you get that nice nostalgia hit. It's always fun. Don't forget to check us out on social media. You can find all the links on our website, animepodcasterreincarnation.com, where you'll also find various articles and new manga reviews. I'd also like to thank Segoy Mart for partnering with us. As our listener, you can get 15% off your first order by using the link in the description or by using the code APR15 at checkout. Once again, thanks for listening, and don't forget to back up your saves.
Cat has arrived.
Yes, Cat.
Yep, I was going to say, he's not going to just let me ignore him.
The cat's name is Cat, by the way.
Yep. This is Cat. I have another one named Action.
I thought you were going to say named Dog. Who's
My
also
dog
a
was
cat.
named Pup.
Well, they very creative, Ben.
So creative. All right.
That was a good tag. Phil, you don't know this, but Brad always does an ending tag depending on what the episode's about. And sometimes they're real winners, and sometimes they're real stinkers, and we let him know it. But he's been on a hot streak. He's been on a hot streak. He's had some real. He's figured it out. He's had some killers recently. And that was another good one.
No, dude, I understand. I mean, like, when I wrap up my segment, my usual last thoughts I say is thank you for listening. But right before it, I do try to do a relative zinger. And there have been a few of them I'm like, man, I really killed it on that one. There have been a few of them I like listened back later and I went, why did I say that? It's on the record now, but it was the dumbest thing I could have thought of. And some of them I'm like, oh God, some of my listeners are just not going to get this joke because they're literally too young. And I'm like, ugh, the old man is showing through again.
I like that though. That's why I do it, because it's like, it's to give the listener a sense of like, yes, we are doing this at this time. We are connected. Everything's connected through and everything. I like it. But yeah, honestly, I said it in the outro, but that was great.
Yeah, no, this
Thank
was
you
great.
so
This
much
went really well.
for joining us.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you, Phil.
I really appreciate. I appreciate being on. Like I said, I very much appreciate you guys having me on. Thank you. Talking for something a little bit different than what I normally talk about. Bringing me back a little bit down memory lane too. It's been a little while since I've been in the anime and manga scene myself, and I keep seeing stuff go by, and I'm like, I should really get into that. And then I realize, I'm a little.
What should we
definitely
suggest to Phil? What's going to be?
Well,
is it the normal two that we always suggest because it's they're all timers?
What I will say is, if you have some time, you should listen to one of the episodes we actually just put out. We did the Beginner's Guide to Anime and Manga.
Oh, okay, that's a solid one.
And I know you're not really a beginner, but I think it would also be good for like coming back into it.
A refresher course, yeah, I could do with that.
We did release it in 2 parts, and the recommendations for like series to get into are in the second part. So if you start,
he knows a lot of the classics. Let's just say the 2 that we're all thinking of that we tell everybody that came out in the last year. It's, if you can find them, check out Spy Family and Chainsaw Man. Those are the 2 those are the big are the big ones we literally cannot shut up
they're on
about.
Hulu.
Yeah.
Hulu?
No, a lot of my students also love Chainsaw Man. I'm looking at this going, all right, I really should look into this.
Chainsaw Man is not like, obviously
if you
it's
like
gonna have
Ninja
its thing.
Scroll.
yeah,
It's doing its thing. It is not like, oh, Demon Slayer, I've seen this,
Chainsaw Man's the one we always give like a content warning to, but I think you'll be fine.
Yeah, and I love campy stuff. I'm not looking for highbrow anything. If I'm entertained, I'm happy. So and I'm like, and I see my kids look at this going, you know what? Even if for context, I really better check this out. So, all right, I'll have to hunt that one down. Definitely.
Chainsaw Man.
Spy Family, I've heard of. I've heard of it, but I've only heard a name. So
Spy Family is like the all rounder. It's like every single thing you want out of a piece of entertainment, it's got that in there.
It's funny, it's
Okay,
action-packed, it's dramatic, it's compelling, it does a million things, and it just does them all effortlessly really well in a way that I'm consistently, like, surprised by.
Okay,
But
I'll have to hunt that.
Put
one
your
down,
eyeballs
too.
on
I
it,
have
give it a
some-
shot. If it talks to you, keep going. If it doesn't, put it down.
Yeah, I've got some free time coming up. I think I need to let me go hunt those down, see what I can come across.